we aren't going to antagonize them over Ukraine. I mean, when the UK and the United States openly admits that even if Russia invades, our only resort is to sanctions. Well, if you've already admitted that, then stop all the talk already about bringing Ukraine into NATO. I mean, you've said basically you're not going to go to war for Ukraine. Therefore, you're never going to issue these Article 5 commitments on behalf of Ukraine. So it shouldn't be that difficult just to say, look, we're going to have to tell Ukraine to accept reality. I mean, and thereby, we can then have our strategic agreements with Russia, but we'll just bring to an end all of this talk about bringing Ukraine into NATO. It's just unrealistic. It's causing aggravation with Russia, and above all, it's threatening to spill over into an actual military confrontation with Russia, and it's just not a good idea.
Well, now, Georgia, I'd like to talk about something I saw you were talking about a little bit on your Twitter feed. What's your view of somebody who I've talked about and was noticing because of the time she spent at the Brookings Institute under Strobe Talbott, which was a central, I've been talking about them for about 5 years. As well, Brookings, it was obvious to me that Strobe Talbott was part of that. But you talked about Fiona Hill as well, and you reminded people that she got into the Trump administration where I think she was an agent provocateur. That's why she went in there. What's your take on Fiona Hill, George?
Well, that's it. I mean, if you remember Fiona Hill, throughout 2015 and 2016, I mean, she was writing articles fiercely denouncing Donald Trump. And it's not at the time, she was still supporting Obama's policy of not sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. But we also know that she knew Christopher Steele very well. She introduced her knowledge of the dossier, but it was obvious that she was lying and that she was intimately involved in that in the creation of the dossier. And then, lo and behold, she gets a job in the Trump administration, and she served there not just for 2 weeks; she was there for 3 years. And as soon as
years ago.
She was very, very hostile to Russia. I mean, she was really Russophobic. So it's very bizarre for her to take a job in the Trump administration, which, at least in its early days, was determined to seek to improve relations with Russia. That's what he had promised in his campaign. And lo and behold, she's in there, and she's actively seeking to sabotage any improvement of relations with Russia. I mean, the way she describes her behavior at the Helsinki summit in 2018 in her book about, that she was, she says, oh, I was thinking of throwing a fainting fit just to, sabotage that news conference between Trump and Putin. I mean, that's how emotional she was. She just, if she throws a fainting fit, she'll become the center of attention, and the news conference can be brought to an end. So I mean, you have to ask, what the hell was she doing working for Trump for 3 years?
Well, I think she was. Right. It's the same thing that Benedict Arnold was doing, working for, the U.S. forces during the Revolutionary War. She was. There you go. And part of it, am I wrong, George, that the Brookings Institution is one of their purposes is to be anti, well, I'll say Russia, but really Putin, because it changed under Yeltsin when Russia was a puppet of the U.S. We seem to like them better, correct?
Yeah. And Talbott was at the heart of that policy. I mean, Talbott was in the Clinton administration during those years, and that was always the goal, just to turn Russia into a puppet of the United States. Just the whole place would just be sold off to U.S. corporate interests. I mean, they would just take bits and pieces. All of the natural resources would be bought up by U.S. companies. It would just simply be owned lock, stock, and barrel by the United States. And Bill Clinton and Stroop Talbott were intimately involved in that. And of course, they engineered the expansion of NATO, which happened under their watch. Again, in violation of all the promises that were made, first, by George H.W. Bush to Gorbachev, but then by Bill Clinton to Boris Yeltsin, because Yeltsin was also concerned about NATO expansion. And Clinton said, oh, no, the Partnership for Peace program, no, that's not NATO expansion. That's just simply about mutual security for Europe. But they were lying to Yeltsin. But Yeltsin was much too weak to be able to offer any kind of resistance to that.
Mm-hmm. No, great point. Now, in the final few minutes we have here, I know it's always tricky to do this, but do you have any predictions about where this is headed, where this is going to be going with Russia? Do you think it's inevitable that you seem to have implied that, but on the record, do you think it's inevitable that the U.S. is going to slink away, back down?
Oh, I don't know if it's inevitable. I think there are clearly divisions within the U.S. government, and it's very hard for the U.S. effort to Ukraine, and then all of that area will be incorporated within Russia. Now, there are people within the U.S. government, within the Biden administration, who might be quite happy with that, because then they can get Ukraine wholly into NATO, because then the conflict, according to NATO's rules, they can't induct somebody into NATO membership if there's a conflict on that country's territory. So if all of that southeast of Ukraine is then, lopped off and incorporated into Russia, then they'll say, hey, Ukraine can join NATO because now there's no longer an internal conflict in Ukraine. So there are people, I think, within the U.S. government who will be quite happy to see the loss of the Donbass to Ukraine, because then they can just bring Ukraine into NATO, and then they think, hey, we've got Russia completely surrounded. Russia's western border is now entirely NATO satellite states. So there are people who want this. I don't think Biden himself particularly wants this outcome because it's very dangerous. But I don't know to what extent he's making any of these decisions. But there's no question there are people who'll be very happy to get rid of the Donbass and incorporate Ukraine into NATO.
Well, one of the things yeah, go ahead, John.
I was going to say that may be the plan. That may be the plan all along, and the American media have missed it. That this way the U.S. can declare victory because we've got Ukraine as a member of NATO. But then at the same time, we've talked in the past about countries like Greece, for example, or North Macedonia that are members of NATO but that have good relations with the Russians. A vote for another country to enter NATO has to be unanimous. And I would have to think that there'd be at least 2 or 3 countries that would vote no on Ukraine. Maybe Romania, it would be another one. Maybe Bulgaria. What do you think?
I think there's a good chance. Hungary would also be very much in question. So then there would have to be quite a lot of coercion involved in doing that. However, if we were in a situation of Russian military intervention and essentially taking over the Donbass, there may be such hysteria throughout Europe, such anti-Russian hysteria. I mean, much more intense than that took place at the time of Crimea, that whatever resistance they might have to getting Ukraine into NATO will just disappear. They'll say, "Oh my God, Russia is back to its most terrifying ways. Yes, we must have Ukraine into NATO." So that if we can, the media will help to gin up a kind of a universal anxiety about the Russian hordes invading Europe. That might just still any anxieties about Ukraine being in NATO.
Well, and after we get back from the break, John, we should talk about what the U.S. plan, because you've said for months you don't see one, and we'll talk about that afterwards. George Samuel, fantastic appearance. Always great to have you on the show. It's late where you are, so please try to get some sleep. And thanks very much for being on. Great analysis. We'll be back on The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make the Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.